Hey there, welcome to Friendly Ties. This is a podcast about board games, and today we're talking about one game, and that's Messina 1347. I'm joined today by my good friends Anastasia and Nick, and we've played it a bunch, so we're going to talk about it a decent bit. Before we get into that, though, I do want to briefly say that we did not film a playthrough for this one like we have for many other games in the past, but we're going to try to explain it as we go, so hopefully this all makes sense. So Nick, why don't you tell us a little bit about the game?
Yeah, so Messina 1347, just as a kind of brief overview of what you're doing in this game, is a 6-round worker placement game. I say that with the trepidation in my voice because you don't place workers really except for when you get them or in the first round. They really move around to different spaces on the board, but worker placement is appropriate because when you've taken an action, it blocks someone else from taking that action. The other thing that you're doing is, of course, like most worker placement games, you're managing your resources as you are going around this plague-ridden city, fighting the plague by burning things to pieces,
Yes.
rescuing the citizens to bring them back to your villa, and in your villa, you'll put them to work. Obviously, they don't just get to live there for free, or they could live there for free.
Yeah, even the sick people
unless you have a ton of people, in which case they don't work. So I guess in theory, they don't have to work. It just kind of depends on your situation. And then ostensibly over the course of the game, you will then use your great influence and power to repopulate the city, and you will send those workers back to Messina to complete the full loop. That's the rough overview of what you're doing.
There's a lot going on in this game. I remember I taught this to you two a few weeks ago, and we've all played it a bunch. I think I played 4 times. Anastasia, you have more plays than that, I think, and Nick is about the same. And
I'm pretty sure I have whatever both of your plays are combined because I've only played it with the two of you, and I've played it every time either of you have played it.
Sure. So we played this one a bunch, 2 and 3 players, and we'll talk about player count a little bit more later. But I did want to say that there's a lot going on to this game. I remember when I taught it, I felt like it was a one more thing type of situation. It looks on the surface like, oh, it's a worker placement game with a few things going on, but it did end up taking me quite a while to teach. And I think we're going to try to talk about different things, not really in a vacuum because everything kind of ties together. But the first big thing is the tile worker placement. There's a hexagon grid in the middle of the table. It's kind of different every time you play the game. Like the tiles are shuffled up, and then you, like Nick said, the first round you just place the workers, and after that you move them around. And you not only have the blocking of, you can't go where somebody else has been, but you have to pay money to travel farther. And so it's possible that somebody the good spots around you have all been occupied, and you have to spend resources just to go to a spot that you might not even be crazy about, I suppose.
Yeah, I love what you said, Nick, about how you were like, it's worker placement-ish, right? So on those tiles, whenever you place on a tile, no one else can go there, right? So it is worker placement in these spots, but there's this spatial aspect because these tiles represent the city, and you are somewhat limited in your movement on where you can go. So I love this decision space where you're like, okay, I want to, especially in the first round, right? I want to place this worker down, but I want to be mindful that I have to kind of think about where else I'm going to be able to go.
Yeah,
because
what's
if
next?
I don't have enough money, I'm going to be kind of stuck in this area. And thankfully the city's not huge, especially at lower player counts. So it's not too bad. But I think when you get up a little bit in that player count, it's a little bit harder to think about kind of where you want to be and how you want to get there.
So in addition to all this, there's this really cool incentivization thing going on as well, because you have these hexagons that have actions on them that are very straightforward. A piece of wood icon and a fire icon means you take a wood token and a fire token from the supply that you can then use later on for stuff. And most of the actions are nice and straightforward. But on top of that, the game itself, in most of the rounds, drops these little plague cubes down onto random-ish hexes on the board, and it also drops citizens down onto random-ish hexes on the board. And when you visit a spot, if there's a citizen there, then you can rescue them, and if there's a plague there, then you can fight the plague. If there's plague and a citizen, then you're going to rescue a sick citizen who goes into a quarantine hut. But citizens are important, and we'll talk about them a lot more later on, but it just adds an extra interesting layer. You're not just going there for the action. You might specifically go to a spot just because there is a nobleman there, and you really need a nobleman to do the other stuff you want to do, and you're like, oh, I guess I'll take 2 wood as well. Maybe I'll find something to do with that later on. And I like that extra layer of incentive that happens. The plague cubes just stack up. The populace kind of stacks up, but if there's plague around, then it's going to wipe them out. So they don't build up that much.
No, but what I love about choosing an action space, right, is that even though these plague cubes come down, the plague, the game, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but taking a citizen on a tile that has plague or taking a citizen off a tile that doesn't have plague is like, either way, it's this extra bonus action because of the various benefits you get. If you fight plague, you get to go up on these tracks and your workers go into a different space. If you take citizens, they go straight on your board and they also get to do cool things. No matter what happens, there's multiple options for this bonus action on top of whatever the action space is doing. And so when you're choosing your spots, I find myself oftentimes being like, ooh, like, I don't want to just take an action. Like, I want to take an action that either has a plague in the citizen or I don't want to take one that just has plague, right? Like, you're
It feels bad if there's no plague and no person. Like, you actively avoid those actions.
Yeah, you're kind of gauging them based on like, okay, what do I want to do? Or what's going to give me the most like layers of actions that I'm going to get to do? So sometimes you might be like, ooh, I think I want to go take, like you said, a fire and a wood. But ooh, if I go over here and I build, I'm gonna get to fight off plague. I'm gonna get this citizen who's gonna go do this other thing for me. And so like I love that. So the actions, it's like layers. They're like constantly changing and giving you more options while the action spots themselves are essentially staying the same.
Yeah, I mean, you're landing on what I think is the dopest part of this game. Like, if you looked at this game and you're like, oh, it's a worker placement game, like, what are the actions? It's like, get a couple of resources, spend a couple of resources, advance on a track. Like, the actual, like, action spaces are not interesting. But what makes it interesting is exactly what you're saying. You ask the question, like, is there a plague cube here or not? And, John, you talked about how, like, normally you want to go where there's, like, a lot of action. But if I don't have any fire, I actually don't want to go to those spaces, right? And yeah. I think that like, it's not asymmetry, but that circumstantial difference, right? Like, you have fire and I don't have fire.
Yeah.
Or I already have 3 nuns, and so going here to get another nun is actually not beneficial for me at all. And that's actually really cool. That sort of that fact that every spot has multiple pieces on it. I think one thing that's could be off-putting about that though, is that it is pretty random in terms of like at the beginning of the turn structure. It's not output randomness, it's input randomness, but like at the beginning of a round, those things are going to get put out by the game board, and then you're going to say, oh, well, that spot's just amazing for me. Obviously, I'm going to go there.
Yeah. This does lend itself towards analysis paralysis, though. You could say that about a lot of worker placement games, like crunching through, well, there's these 3 things I need to do, and what's the priority? Because if I don't do the highest priority and somebody takes it, then everything could fall down. And you can spend a lot of time thinking through that. What action spots do I want to go to? What action spots can I even reach by moving my workers around? Do I have enough money to move the workers as far as I need to go? Oh, crap, I really need a craftsman. Are there any craftsmen out there? There is a craftsman over there. Okay, now do you think about that one? And then once you add the next layer of like, what are my opponents going to do? You really can spin off the rails unless you are really vigilant about stopping yourself from doing that.
And we as a play group are generally pretty cool with take backs and can I fix that?
Yeah.
But if a round goes by, someone else has moved to another location and like taken choices, you actually really can't roll those things back. So
no.
it does lend itself a little bit more to that AP problem.
For sure. And I think that this is definitely one of those games where you can make a mistake that does hurt you. I mean, the timing of when you take your actions is so key. I mean, John and I literally just played this last night, 2-player, and at the very end of the game, there are only 3 spots that move. There are only 3 spots that did what I needed them to do. And I took one and he took one. And then I made a calculated risk by misreading his board and didn't take the other one. And then he went to take it. And we had one of those moments which you never want to have in a game where I was like, look, you can say like, I already went and you can go, but I'm going to tell you right now, my whole game is tanked if you do this right now.
Yeah.
Like,
if you didn't bring this up, I was going to. Yeah. The sound you made when I took that spot, it was just like this combination of horror and bewilderment, because you were so sure there's no world where I would do it, because you had glanced over at my board and misread where one of my tokens
Completely
was.
misread it. Yes, completely misjudged it. And I was just like, yeah, if you do this, I'm going to just sit here and just be devastated. And like, you'll just win by like, you will definitely win by tons and tons of points, because I was just like, so he was very gracious and let me take it back and let me do it. And he was still ultimately able to do it in a different way, or get the movement he needed to.
Yeah. Well, it's about having fun, right?
Yeah. Oh, but I was so grateful.
It's one thing to say, oh, I didn't think of that. It's another thing to say, oh, I misinterpreted that. Like looking at a board, where is that token on my board versus your board? There's a lot of tokens going around. So that actually, lends itself to another analysis part is there's a lot of little tokens to consider where they're at for yours, where your opponents are at, and how that applies to everything. Because if you if you glance over and think it's one spot, but it's actually an inch away from where you thought it was, that could devastate your whole game plan.
And it's interesting too, right? Like I wouldn't describe this game as like a crazy brain burner. Like I'm like calculating like this and that. I find that the mistakes come in like a 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 mistake. And then I'm like, that equals 3. It's like, no, it equals 5. Wait, what? How?
Yeah.
And I think, we're going to go into some details of some of the other pieces and how you get here and what are these bots doing and why it becomes this kind of fun, wild, like chaining of actions kind of thing. But before we do that, I don't want to go too much farther without just kind of acknowledging the inherent player count differences here, right? Because it really speaks to what we're talking about, right? The AP, the randomness, the tightness of these action spaces. And now we have all played this. I think I played it 5 times.
I think that's
played
true.
it. We the three of us played it twice. There, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more too. But there's a beginner game and an advanced game. So we played it one way each at 3. John and I played it twice at 2, one way each, and then Nick, I think you and I played it twice at 2 players. Well, just once, right? Yeah, just the once. Okay, so I am very curious to hear your guys' thoughts, though I think I know them. But I'm gonna say unequivocally, this is a 2-player only game for me. Plays to 4. It's absolutely a 2 to 4 player game. I'm sure there's many people who would love it, but I will probably only ever play this game at 2, and that's because for me, there's just enough control over your actions, and that kind of counteracts that randomness and like kind of self-limits my personal AP, right? Like so that weighing I was doing with the action with John, I was like, I can calculate what he's going to do enough. But at 3, so many, two other people going and taking moves and blocking your spots. It is too hard to plan when you're playing with 3 players. There's no way that you're going to know what's going to be available to you. So by the time it gets back to you, the downtime is crazy because you're just like, okay, wait, well now I just need to like completely reanalyze the board because I have no sense of what I can do because I've got, 2 people going, and I might play it at 3, but definitely would never play it at 4.
If you're at 4, you have to be ready to throw 50% of your plans out the window at any given time.
Yeah, 100%.
I'd say that's generous.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just really good at planning.
As far as like hard numbers are concerned, I think it's worth mentioning that our first 3-player game took almost 3 hours, not quite. And the very next night we played it 3 players again, and it was like 2 hours and 20 minutes. So like it was already significantly faster on our second play at 3 players. But then subsequently, I know the 2-player games I played with you, Anastasia, those were both a little under 2 hours.
And Nick and I think, played it in 90 minutes. You can definitely get it down if you're kind of going speedy.
Yeah, I'm a slower player than Nick, for sure.
Yeah, John and I love to just kind of be lazy in games and let our minds go with them.
And that's the thing. I'm totally down with a 2-hour experience for this game. And for me personally, I would play it at 3 in the future, but I also prefer it at 2. Honestly, it's been a joy to play at 2. That's a little bit of a spoiler for how much I've been enjoying the game. And I enjoyed it less at 3, not only because of the analysis paralysis, but the downtime. It just, because there's a lot to think about, it should sometimes take a while to get back to me. Also because there's differing numbers of workers that you can have in this game, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later on. So in that second game, that was 3 players. I definitely found myself in a situation where like I was done and I was not going to be able to do anything for like at least 10 minutes because both of you had like way more workers than me and I was just out of it at that point. So the overall time is important, and some people are totally fine with a 3-hour 3-player game. And for some people that'd be way too much. I don't see myself ever playing this at 4 players. Just like you said, I just feel like I would play a different game at 4 because there's just it would just be too long. That's the other thing. Like, you take the same number of actions per player, no matter how many players are around the table. And, 6 rounds, 3 workers minimum per player, that's 18 turns. So you add another player in, that's 18 more turns minimum that happens. And usually you get a 4th or even a 5th worker. So, if every turn was only, 1 minute long, then you're looking at adding, close to half an hour just for adding another person in there. Maybe a little bit longer than a minute, but you get what I'm saying.
It scales linearly. I
Yeah.
agree. I'd actually first of all co-sign all your comments about the 2, 3, and 4 player. I'm actually a person who prefers to play Euros at like 3 and 4 players, and I think you're both totally correct. This is a game that's better at 2 or 3. I want to actually take on that point that you had there, John, because that's something that I struggle with in this game. Is that it feels to me like it is pretty hard to catch up. Now, I don't think that it's easy to fall behind in this game, but if you do fall behind, I feel like I could see the writing on the wall and get a little bit bummed a couple rounds out from the end of the game. In a 6-round game, I feel like it could be round 4 and I could be like, I'm just dead. And I don't like that feeling in a game. I don't like the death march to the end of the scoring rounds.
Yeah.
I think that Anastasia, though, you had sort of a different experience in this with this game that you played with John last night. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. I mean, I love that you brought that up, Nick, because, and I guess this is sort of the perfect segue to talk a little bit more about these kind of beginner boards and then the advanced boards. And so you have a personal player board, right? It's called the Overseer board, which is, I don't know if that's the best name, but I guess that's what it's called. And I think you said we're overseeing villas. Is that what we're overseeing, Nick?
Yeah, it's your villa. Messina's in Italy, right? So it's a villa.
Okay, sure. This is a village, but sure, villa, sure. But you
Genoese, so it's definitely Italian. Yes.
So you're overseeing these villas, and I think we'll go a little bit more into the mechanics on that in a minute. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because I think it makes a big difference in terms of getting behind, whether you're playing that beginner board or the advanced board. So last night, John and I played a game of this where it was a 2-player game. We were playing the advanced boards, and we had 2 very different boards. He had one that had these immediate bonuses that were fantastic. And John was doing things in the first 2 rounds of the game that if I didn't love this game, which is a spoiler, I love this game. If I didn't love this game, I would hate this game. Like, if that was my first play of the game, watching John just pop off with these magical turns while I sat there very slowly building my little engine, it was awful. Like, I had to really kind of hold it, knowing that my board
Super selling this game, by the way.
I know. No, bear with me. The advanced boards are different, right? They have different bonuses and different benefits and different things you can do. And we had all agreed that the board that I was playing was subjectively what we thought was the weakest board. And that's because it doesn't have shiny moments. It had more end game moments, right? It had things that really benefited you later in the game. And I had to wait. And so I was watching John do all of this stuff. And then suddenly my game started taking off. And then I started having crazy turns. And then my bonuses started kicking in. But that all happened in the second half of this game. This game has arcs. And so I had to wait. And the reason I'm saying that is so both to respond to what you were saying, Nick, that I do think it's possible to come back in this game. I don't think it's possible to do that with the beginner boards. I don't think there's enough kind of going on. So I do want to kind of like just flat like warn on that. And I may be totally wrong, but that's just my impression. I do think it's possible with the advanced boards because there's so much more going on and you have kind of different goals that you're going for. But I do think you have to be patient, and I do think you have to play very tactically and react to the situation and be very like, and I think you have to stomach it. Like, I think you can't, if you just sit there and think my game is tanked and you give up, it will be tanked. You do have to kind of like know that your experience may be on a different pace. And that's exactly what happened. And I will admit, I lost to John, but I only lost to John by like 13 points which we, and if he made one less move, it would have been 5 points. I mean, it was, and in this game that is very tight. It was super close. And considering that when we sat down, I was like, oh, I'm playing the worst board and John's playing the best board. And then it was so close. And it was kind of amazing to see that happen, actually.
There is a flip side to that. Like that game was really great to see you come back like that. But when I played that advanced board the previous time, I had one of the worst gaming experiences I've had in like the last year. It was just it was miserable.
Yeah.
It was miserable. Yeah, and we played the exact same board.
Super selling this game, guys.
I know. But what
this
I'm saying is
okay, right now, favorite game of 2021. I'm just gonna put it out there. Massive spoiler. So don't stop listening. Keep listening.
I just want to say that like you can fall behind, and I did, and I feel like I'm not blaming the board for it. I made some poor decisions, but I was 2 rounds into that 6-round game, and I just had this feeling like I am totally toast. And Nick literally doubled my score, and Anastasia was way closer to Nick than I was in that game. Like I never got up. Like I essentially was crawling that whole game, and that was pretty miserable. And I did it to myself. I made those decisions, but the game also let me make those decisions and let me find myself in that place where, it was a 3-player game. I kept coming in last in the player order, and I desperately needed to get citizens to make my little plan work. And I kept going last, and the both of you kept taking all the good citizens, and the only citizens left were the ones that didn't make sense. And it was a downward spiral for sure. So I was really happy to see Anastasia. You did awesome with that board when I did so poorly with it. But I think that's because you played it better than I did.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's no Hail Mary that you can take in this game to try to catch up, right? Like you need to be there. And what I'm hearing from Anastasia is leaning into the asymmetry of, by the way, the advanced boards and the basic boards. The short difference is that the advanced boards are asymmetric and the basic boards are not.
Yeah.
So leaning into your asymmetry was what helped you sort of play that catch up game, and doing that well sort of rewarded you, which is interesting. I think that's a lesson for anyone who's picking up this game for the first time, that sort of being generous in the first few rounds with players, just in terms of like what's going to happen, or like really kind of like stomping them down, is going to change their experience and how they're playing this game. And since we're already talking about the like advanced versus beginner boards, I know that Anastasia's a fan of the advanced boards. I prefer the beginner boards. So John, you got a tie break for us here.
we talked about this a little bit last night. I think probably my preferred way to play would be right in the middle. That's because you have this.
You're advanced and I'm beginner.
Well, you have this asymmetric board in front of you, but then there's a separate board that has these end game scoring conditions, and it's a completely different token. And you could play with the normal boards and go with the asymmetric different end game scoring tiles, or you could go asymmetric on all of the things. And I think it's probable that my favorite way to play this game is with the basic boards, but the asymmetric, slightly more advanced end game conditions, because that's going to mix up what you're going to do from one game to the next, like what's emphasized by those different scoring conditions. But I will also say, after playing last night, that I'm much more on team advanced board than I was before. And I also want to say that while I had that absolutely miserable 3-player game, I wasn't blaming the game itself. I just had a really bad play, and I really wanted to play it again, and I played it twice since then and had a blast with both of those. So I was very happy to see that was an outlier, but it's still a data point.
Yeah, and I think that is just a product of a game like this. So I compare it to another one of my favorites, Grand Austria Hotel, and the reason why I see such a comparison between the two of them is because both of these games have a lot of input randomness. You're adapting to the randomness of the board in this game and to the things that come out in the same way that I feel like in Grand Austria Hotel you're adapting to the dice. And those in both cases, just as we've already explained, it's gonna dictate your actions. It's gonna dictate your choices. The citizens that you take, that you put on your board. We haven't quite explained this yet, but there are 3 types of citizens, right? And they each go into different places and they each do different things. And so, but they come out randomly. And so you have to adapt to that. And I think the very nature of that means that it's going to be possible that you're going to have a bad game. It's going to be possible where like nothing is going to go your way, or people are going to take what you need. And it's just not going to come together. That is just the nature of these games. And then on the flip side, you're going to have games that like totally pop off, and you're going to get these crazy chains, and it's going to be super satisfying. But I think that in order to have games that can go to that like pop off, super satisfying place, it inherently comes with the flip side of games that may just not come together. That is a fact of Grand Austria Hotel. It's a fact of this game. And as long as you accept that and know that going in a game that can play pretty fast like this, I think if you played it really tight at 2-player, you could even get it down to 75 minutes. People on Board Game Geek claim they can play it in an hour. I think you can have a ton of fun with that, but you kind of do need to know that. And John, you've totally highlighted why that's totally a piece of this game.
Before we move on from this, I want to very briefly talk a little bit more about the workers, the specific number of them, because you start the game with 3, as I said, and you can get more. You can get all the way up to 5. And I have a really silly thing that I want to say.
And the workers aren't the citizens, just to be clear. We should kind of like clarify that, right? You have workers that you're placing, and citizens are like little people you're taking off. They're a resource,
essentially, yeah.
And the citizens work for you, so don't get confused.
Yes, exactly. But the thing I was thinking about, specifically after I had that really unhappy play, is that this game is fun when you're doing things. And I think that's it's kind of a silly thing to say, like, duh. But a big problem that I had in that game is I was trying to play it with just 3 workers. There's a few tracks, and one of them lets you unlock more workers. And I felt like I was going to try to be successful, because there's lots of other ways to squeeze bonus actions out of different mechanics that we haven't discussed just yet. And I kind of fell on that sword of like, I'm not going to get more workers. I'm going to try to do good with 3, while both of you got up to 5 workers. And you just did so many more things than I did. And like I said, with the downtime, like I'd do my 3 actions, and then I'd have to wait for both of you to take 2 more actions between you, which caused downtime. And at the end of the day, I just found myself feeling like it's only fun when you're doing stuff. And so I personally feel like every time I'm going to play Messina, I'm probably going to try to rush to get the 4 and 5 workers. That's what I did last night. I got my 4th worker in the very first round, and I got my 5th worker in the second round, which is why Anastasia thought I was going to run away with it. And it was awesome that you caught up, considering I had 5 workers for several rounds where you had 3. Like you'd be done, and then I just like take a few actions by myself. And so it's cool to see that rubber band back from a balance perspective, but from like a fun perspective, I see myself always leaning towards getting more workers, because just having less wasn't as fun to me.
I mean, let's be clear. In the games that we've played, no one has ever won this game with just 3 workers. The game, it feels really bad to not have them. And, in most worker placement games, getting more workers is just really good. And in this game, there's no payment. You don't need to feed them. There's no sort of like consequences for having extra ones. You just need to move up this track to a certain distance. And so it's pretty clear to me that not getting the 4th worker is just a shoot yourself in the foot decision in this game.
You probably don't need the 5th one, but you got to get that 4th one. I mean, that being said, Anastasia, you got him late last night, and you still managed to make it work.
I did, and I found myself, I don't like games that sort of force you in one direction. And if there is a critique to have for this game, is that the nature of this game, there's an arc here, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it does kind of point you in some directions that it sort of feels like you have to take. And I don't love that. And whenever I see that in the game, I tend to naturally be like, well, what's option B? Like, I don't know why I'm so contrarian, but I just am like, I don't like to be forced to do anything. And so I don't love that it does kind of feel like you need to run up this one particular track that gives you workers. And John, I've seen you do that in every game, and I don't like to think that has to be the path. And I have not found myself in a position in any of the games I've played that I have felt like that was the best move for me. And so in almost every game, I have only had 3 workers for most of the game. And last night, with no exception, there's only 6 rounds. I had got my 4th and 5th worker both in the 5th round.
Right.
So it is possible to still do fairly well by not having them. But it is true that John just had more opportunity to do things by having those extra workers. And I do worry that it will always be better to get that fourth worker early or to get that fifth worker as soon as possible. And the one disadvantage that I do want to point out is that you can pay money to move up on. There are 3 tracks in this game. One of them is the plague track, and whenever you fight plague, you're going to go up it. There's no way to move up that otherwise. The other 2, one of them is going to give you workers, and the other one kind of makes your overseer board, the board we've been talking about that we haven't fully explained, but it makes moving on that board better. And you can pay money to move up the worker track or the overseer track. And once you add another worker, the cost for moving up that goes up. So I do think it is interesting to consider possibly working a strategy where you keep low on workers and you use money to move up higher on the bottom track, which is essentially what I did last night, and then get your workers. But I still don't know that that's enough to overbalance, someone having their 4th and 5th worker fairly early on. So, a lot of things to consider.
Well, I think we should really talk about those overseer boards now because,
Yeah.
somebody who doesn't know how the game plays, you might be thinking, how the heck could somebody vie for contention with 3 workers versus 5? And that's because workers aren't the only way you get actions in this game. You have this player board in front of you, and you put citizens down onto it. 6 citizens go into little quarantine huts, and they stay there for a couple rounds, and then you're able to use them out on this board. And I'm not even going to try to graphically describe it to you. Feel free to Google it if you want. It's effectively some looping tracks. And many actions, many different things in this game let you move a token down these tracks, and you have your citizens next to the tracks, kind of on either side. And when you move these tokens around, you can actually pop off with them and get a bunch of bonus actions for them, especially because you can upgrade them and whatnot. So from a very high level, what that means is like these workers, you just move the workers around the board. I remember last night there was one turn where I moved my worker and I got 1 wood, and that was my whole action from that 1 worker. So yes, I had more workers, but I didn't get much out of that 1 action. I needed that wood, but still, versus Anastasia moved one of those overseers on her board and did 3 things with it. She flipped over a citizen, she got a major fire token, and then she spent the money to go up one of the tracks. It was just like, whoa, okay. So you can have these little action explosions without even using your workers. And so there's ways to weave all this stuff together. And it's honestly challenging to describe all this in podcast form.
I mean, the way I view the citizens, right? There's green, brown, black citizens. There's 3 tracks, and they're forked at the end of the tracks. You choose this green guy is going to pair up with browns, or this green guy is going to pair up with blacks, right? And you have to choose how you're establishing that on your board. And so that's how you get your crazy combos, right? Is by choosing what those pairings are. This visually is very cool on the board, and I would say is maybe my favorite, or if not my second favorite component of this game, is these again unfortunately named overseer boards, where you're using these citizens to cash in on all these extra bonuses. The games that have felt the most insane have always been with setting up nice little combos that trigger resource gain and build a thing. Multiple stuff is going on. These citizen boards are really where the cool stuff happens in this game. And also the stuff where you're well, I set this guy up here, and now I'm taking this action because I'm very amazing at this game by having lined up these 2 tracks with each other, and now they're pinging off of each other, and that's so awesome. And so the overseer board is unique in its interwovenness of these sort of 3 colors of rewards that you can get with her, which are the citizens.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this before.
I haven't.
It is very unique to this game. I agree, Nick. This is my favorite aspect of the game. It is so cool, and it looks almost like a flower. I don't. It's hard. It is really hard to describe. Yeah. I was gonna say a fleur de lis, and it's and you really have to think about it. You might sit down and look at it and think, oh, I'm gonna do all of this, but you're not. You're gonna do one segment of this, and it's like you said, Nick. It's gonna be 2 different colors. It's gonna be 2 halves of 2 out of the 3 colors is probably what you're gonna do most, and then maybe something else, and that's how you're gonna make these crazy combinations, because there's a real ramp factor with these boards. Like the first movement only lets you choose from like 2 spaces, but then as you keep going, you're allowed to choose from these different segments. And then as you get further, then you can choose from 2 different segments. And if you're able to then flip your token, which is something you can do when I was talking about those different tracks, moving up on that track that kind of affects your overseer board will let you flip your token over. And doing that is going to like let you take an additional action. So as you keep going and like kind of working your board, and obviously there's worker placement spots within the city of Messina that are going to let you move. And when I was talking about the 3 actions that created the situation with John in the game last night, it was an overseer movement move that I needed to take, right? Because it just leads to so many other things, because the action spots on these boards are also like the action spots within the tiles on the city of Messina. So it's like you think you're taking one action, but then it's just going to build out into a whole bunch of other things. And it's so satisfying. It's so fun. And I love it. I love this part of the game. And I think that it's just, like I said, it's like nothing I've ever seen before.
I think your fastest strategy level up in this game is to realize that you should get citizens because they're relatively free to get if you pay attention to where they are. And then the overseer actions are the best actions you can take in this game.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And that's not really worker placement. That's just this little puzzle that's in front of you. And, paying attention to other people's puzzles is good too.
I just want to be clear that like when we're talking about these action spots on the board, they only work if you take a citizen and put it in there, whether, like John said, you pull them from your quarantine cabin or whether you take them off of the board. And so when we were talking about earlier about these kind of interesting decisions that you have to make, do you take a 6 citizen and do you put them over here, or do you put someone onto your board? These are kind of what you're thinking when you're looking at your overseer board. Am I going to be able to use an action because I have a citizen there? And I want to make sure we're clear on that.
And one other interesting thing about the citizens is they're a multi-use resource to a certain extent. They can come off the board sick or they can come off the board healthy. When they're sick, they go into quarantine cabins, and you can actually build things so that sick people in your cabins make you resources or points or money or fire tokens that you can use to fight the plague. Healthy ones go onto your main board, like we were just saying, that you can then activate with overseers. And then you can also construct these buildings to then remove healthy citizens from your combo board and put them into this little house, which will either give you immediate stuff or ongoing stuff. And when you move those citizens kind of through this system, you get various things out of them. When they're in the quarantine huts, you get income. When they're on the player board, you get pop-off combo stuff. When you remove it from the player board, you're maybe breaking that combo up, but maybe that's fine because you just removed a black token, and now you have another black token that's about to come in. And finally, these citizens, as we mentioned way at the beginning, return to Messina. The arc of this game is there's plague has arrived, everybody tries to leave, and by the end of the game, you want to bring people back. And you could remove people from your combo board or from your houses even, essentially removing those incomes in order to repopulate the board. And this is a big action that we haven't talked about yet. When you move your workers and place them onto the board, you either do the action that's printed there, or you could repopulate. And that's just essentially just spend your people. You lose them; they go back to the supply. It's the end of the overall system. You've squeezed a whole bunch of value hypothetically out of them, and now they leave. And then every time you repopulate, you put a token onto a hex, and you get a pile of points for the end of the game.
You are opening the door to a conversation that I wanted to have about I know theme is a fraught word to use in the board game world. Like, we don't necessarily agree on what theme means in games, but the theme of this game or the story of this game, and it has a couple hits and misses for me, and I am not sure where I really land in terms of, do I think this game is like thematic, because I have those like very dichotomous feelings. So let me start off with the hit. And the hit for me is that the designer of this game very explicitly said they wanted there to be an arc in the game, right? And the idea here is that the plague starts coming out, the plague gets insane, and then the plague is washed away, and you take these citizens and you return them to Messina. And the mechanics of this game and the reward systems of this game make that happen every game.
They do.
It is always going to ramp up. You are motivated as a player in the game to then kind of repopulate the city, and I think that flow of the game is a total hit for me in terms of the theme and the mechanics being married to the theme here.
Is there a miss that's coming after that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I just wasn't sure if there was anything that y'all really loved before I like took my beef here. So my miss is the plague cubes, which we haven't talked about the plague cubes in depth. And it's even right now in this moment, I called them plague cubes, not the plague. And I think that's bad. Plague cubes come out in this game at the beginning of every turn. They go on a third of the areas in the city. And sometimes they go with citizens and sometimes they don't. And if a citizen is in a place with a plague cube, then when you save them, they need to go into the quarantine cabin. And if you don't save them, they go straight into your villa as you've saved them and they're relatively healthy. I don't like this mechanic because in general, you're motivated to fight plague in this game rather than avoid plague, which I think is counterintuitive. There is a penalty for going to plague locations, but in the games that we've played, the penalty has been minuscule enough that if you need to go there, you will go there. And largely what you're going to do is be prepared to fight the plague anyway. I don't understand the idea of like, I'm this like villa owner who's like rescuing citizens but also like trying to collect my own like money and resources. Like I just seem like I'm doing everything. Like I'm both a philanthropist and a merchant. And then the thing that really got under my skin the most was I was playing a game where I was trying to decide what action to take on a turn. And I asked John, who's, our perpetual game teacher, I said, can I take a citizen that isn't sick and put them in a quarantine cabin? Because that was the best thing that could happen for me in the game. Yeah. And of course the answer is no. And the fact that went through my head is nonsense to me, right? The fact that I would ever be motivated to get sick citizens rather than like healthy citizens is like, it just boggled my mind and it really bothered me.
That happened last night in our game with Anastasia. We were in the I think it was the 6th round of the game. It just started, and Anastasia commented like, okay, I need to get a sick person. I looked out to the board and I said, there's no sick people.
There's none. They don't exist.
That's it. There's no more sick people for the rest of the game. And you're like, yay. But I got all these. I could really do with some sick people right now. Yeah.
I mean, it's just, it's so funny because I mean, you're right, Nick. I mean, it doesn't, I could twist the theme here and like make it make sense. I'm like, well, you don't want to put healthy people into your quarantine cabins because they've been infected with plague and like blah, 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 blah. But I, at the same time, from a game design perspective, I love that decision. I love that you have people in quarantine. We haven't really talked about this, but your people in quarantine stay there for 2 rounds. They move, they stay there for 1 round. They make the stuff that they make you, and then they stay there for another round, and then they come onto your board. And so there's this kind of ongoing timing mechanic, right? Like I'm going to put this person down. It's going to work for me for 2 rounds, and it's going to go do something else for me. And then to your point about the arc of the game, Nick, then I might go put it to work doing something else for me in a building where it can live. And then I might go put it to work repopulating Messina. And so it's like, if you really are playing the game well, these citizens are going to move all through all these different places on your board. And I think that is so cool. I love that. And so it's interesting because, wow, when I hear you take it apart, I'm like, well, yeah, that's like, it doesn't feel perfectly thematic, but at the same time, I feel like this is one of the most thematic Euros I've ever played. I mean, to see the way that arc plays out, and the plague gets worse at a certain point, and it gets harder to fight at a certain point, and that it encourages you. I feel the opposite of what you say, Nick. Like, it encourages you to fight the plague, to stop it, to get it out of Messina, rather than to avoid it and let it overtake Messina. Like, I do enjoy that there's a fight back element to that, and that there's a reward for that, and that you have citizens who actually, unlike a lot of games, they just come onto your board and they just sit. They actually do different things, and they move, and then they move around, and then when they go repopulate, they stop working for you. Like, you don't just get to hold on to them. So I really enjoy how they have worked the theme into this game and actually added that. And I don't usually care about theme. You give me the driest Euro and I'll still play it. Like, I don't care. But, if it's there and it works, I love it. I think it's great. So I hear you, but I think I disagree with you.
Well, none of us have ever once named our citizens, so there's a whiff there.
Oh.
That's true.
Remember, though, when the first game we played this, I built them a little house. Like, when I repopulated them, I, drew them. We should acknowledge, we've only played this game on Tabletop Simulator. I have ordered myself a copy from Europe, but we haven't dealt with a lot of the, we can't speak to, how fiddly is it to reset the game, and we haven't used the spinner or any of the stuff that the mod has done all of that for us. But I drew them a little house because I was sad. Remember, I was sad that they were leaving my town to go. I miss them.
Live a better life, right?
Yeah. As I made them a little home, I drew it on the board. So
from a mechanical perspective, the end of this loop of the repopulating Messina is probably my least favorite part of the whole game. And the reason for that is because so many of the things that you do in this game get you stuff and potentially popping off or potentially setting things up to pop off. But in order to repopulate Messina, you spend an entire action repopulating. You don't do any of the other actions. You also rip your engine apart, which I'm kind of okay with. I like the idea of that arc. But the real kicker is that you need a wagon to bring these people to Messina. And that might seem like a strange minutia, but in this game, you're going to be doing these construction actions. You can build those quarantine cabins that we've talked about and the buildings we've talked about, or you could construct a wagon. And the only thing these wagons do is bring people back to the city, and they give you a couple of points. And this leans into a bit of a pet peeve of mine that I have sometimes with Euros, where the thing that's good for you to do might not actually be the fun thing to do. Constructing a quarantine cabin or maybe one of those late game buildings is fun. That late game building maybe bumps you up a couple times on a track, which unlocks your final worker and you're doing cool stuff. Or you buy this wagon and it gets you 2 points, and then at some point in the future, you can essentially take a non-turn to cash in a bunch of points. Because whenever you repopulate, that's all you do, is you just remove the people from your engine, and then at the end of the game, you're going to get a bunch of points. And again, I'm totally fine with the removing people from your engine part. I like that overall flow. It's just the fact that you have to essentially have a boring build action to make this wagon, and now that you built this wagon, you have a big incentive to use it in order to have another kind of boring turn just getting points. And you need the most points to win, so I get that. But I definitely, every time I've done a repopulate action, I found myself wishing I was doing something else, but I guess I really should do this right now, and usually that was the right call.
If you don't think scoring 15 points is exciting, then I don't know what to do.
Well, I mean, and that's the kind of the unfortunate part about it, right? Is it's one of the major ways to score points in this game. John's already talked about it.
It can be significant, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big thing. There's another way. He already talked about these kind of scroll boards that you get, and they do give you these, like we've said, these asymmetric end game scoring points that are also fairly massive, right? So you can I think get away without repopulating Messina, but the game really doesn't want you to, and this goes back to what I was saying too about kind of the kind of, I don't want to say ruts, but there is a path here, and it sort of wants you to follow it.
Yeah.
And so I totally agree with you, John. It for me, it is the least exciting part of the game. And, we were talking about this play John and I had where I came back, in the second half of the game. But a big part of that was because my board incentivized end game scoring. And it's not the funnest thing to do. And I had to sort of accept that and lean into that. And John and I played another game last week where I just didn't want to. I didn't want to shift into end game scoring, and then I lost by a ton, because I was just having so much fun doing all the other stuff. And we talked about this a lot after that play. It was we wished that when you took a repopulate action, you got to do something else, and you got to take the action, you got to do something else. And it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work for that to happen, but it does feel kind of lame. But I just want to kind of loop back on all of that to say that what I did notice last night was that by the end of the game, John and I each had 5 workers. And by that point, it did feel like there was really nothing else for the 4th and 5th worker to do but to repopulate, right? Yeah. And I actually felt like, but by that point, let's be clear, that was my 6th play of this game. So by the time we did that, 5th or 6th, like by the time I felt like, oh, this worked out in a way where I saw what they were intending with this, that I had already had to have played the game 5 or 6 times to get there. But I did see that having that 4th and 5th worker, I was like, okay, this is what this one's supposed to do. And I think I paired it with fighting off some plague, which moved me up on a track, which moved me up on another track, which did give me some kind of follow-up actions. It didn't feel as good as taking an action.
Yeah.
But at that point, I also just didn't have anything else to do because I had built to that moment. So I don't know. I think it's just something you have to accept about the game, but it is the least exciting part of the game.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a pet peeve. I don't have a problem with the idea of the repopulating. I just wish there was more fun sauce slathered on top of that, as opposed to just like here's a pile of points. I wish the cart wasn't there to have like one less step towards that whole thing happening. But again, that is minutia, and honestly, I think that's gonna kind of bring me to a point where I want to back up a little bit. And to kind of sum up a lot of my thoughts about the game overall. I've mentioned a couple times that I had like a miserable play and then some wonderful plays. And where I land with Messina, all combined, is that I've really enjoyed playing this game at 2 players. I had an okay game at 3 and an awful game at 3, so I think that's kind of where I land. Like, I'm actively looking forward to playing this game at 2 players more. I'm looking forward to exploring the advanced boards more. This is, it's been a fun game overall. Like, I really like the puzzles and the stuff that comes together. I think the pet peeves that I have don't drag it down too much as long as the downtime is kept in check.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I've made it pretty clear throughout this podcast how much I have enjoyed playing this game. I think it scratches my brain in the best way. There's just enough randomness to kind of limit my AP, but just enough to think about that there's plenty for my mind to chew on. It doesn't break my brain. It gives me lots to do. It's very satisfying. And I've had an absolute blast playing it. And we've played a lot of great games this year, and I thought Ark Nova was going to be my favorite game of 2021, and I really, really enjoy Ark Nova too, for similar reasons. But this game, they're very, very different. I'm not trying to compare them in any way, shape, or form. I just think that for me, with the way this game moves and how satisfying it is, I don't think I'd ever turn down a play of this. And I went out, found myself a copy of it, and I'm kind of constantly saying, let's play this one. So I have greatly enjoyed it. And I just want to circle back on, two pieces of it that I do think are a little bit of one is an excitement and one is a hesitation. And my hesitation is what I've been talking about, which are the sort of ruts that I feel like you can fall into. And as much as I enjoy exploring the game and really hope that I can find different avenues, I do worry that, moving up on that worker track is really important, or, that you have to kind of switch to repopulating in the later rounds. And it is interesting that you start this game with absolutely no resources. Like, you just start. So you're always starting completely blank, and it just kind of starts flat. But the other hit for me is something we haven't quite talked about, is that the advanced boards, unlike the beginner boards, have these immediate bonuses that you can take. When you put a citizen on, it immediately does an action, rather than you put it down and then you have to take an overseer movement to get to it. That's, for me, the biggest difference between the two. And I just think that is so much fun. It pops your game off from the beginning, depending on the board that you play. And it just creates constant fun choices and constant different avenues about how you want to execute. And I love that. I can't wait to explore that more. And I hope that if this game kind of sticks around, if there's more to it, that there's just even more variability around that to be explored within what I think is really cool design.
It's so funny to me because I like this game, but the things that Anastasia's pointing out as like some of her favorites are some of the things that are really stand out as the things getting in the way for this game being really like a great game for me. Really, I mean, I think it's very good. I enjoy it, and I would play it, with Anastasia anytime she wanted to, basically, right? But I'm not seeking it out, and I'm not going to teach it to other people. The things that really stand in the way for me are, as she mentioned, I don't like that everyone starts with nothing in this game, and the first round of this game is like, this game's already long enough as it is. And I think not as an expansion, but just straight up as a component of the design, I think it would be better if the first round was abstracted out and you had some starting bonuses. It could be something like a Zulkin where like you have different starting bonuses or whatever. But I really think that the game could have been cut down in favor of that. And I think it would have just improved the experience. Maybe not the whole design, but I think it would have improved the experience. So that's a whiff for me. I also, in general, don't prefer a game where you can do everything. And you know, all of us now have played at least one game where we've just like popped off like crazy, basically done everything in the game and broken the scoring track. Like the scoring track doesn't even go to the points that we've received.
Yeah, it goes up to
in
150 and we've gone above that.
Definitely gone over that, yeah.
And in my second game I scored in the 170s or something like
Yeah.
that. Like I like a game. To me, variability in a game is you can't explore all the avenues. And so that's something that's a personal preference for sure. That's not a criticism of the game. It's just something that doesn't land for me as much. And then, you know, I mentioned way earlier in this podcast that I didn't like the advanced boards as much. Anastasia mentioned, and I agree with, the biggest difference is the one-off actions. I just feel they're unfair. And that's the part that I don't like about the advanced boards. They are exciting for the person who's executing them, right?
Yeah.
And I think they induce jealousy in the other players, not joy. And I think I don't like that it does that. So I've talked about the things that I haven't liked, but I also really want to hit the things that I do think are cool about this game. When we first played this game, the worker placement, worker movement thing seemed okay to me. But as we played a little bit more, the fact that every space asks you 3 questions: what does my space do? What are the citizens here? And what's the plague situation on this space? Those 3 very simple questions with very simple rewards make an easy decision into a very interesting complex decision. And I think good complex games take easy decisions and make them into complex decisions. Total victory right there. That's my favorite part about this game. And then, as I mentioned before, my second favorite part about this game is that overseer track. The fact that you can have these citizens, as Anastasia actually mentioned when we were talking about the theme section, right? Like, live a different life. They can do this, and then they can serve this purpose and this purpose. Like, that is cool from a game design perspective. It's like a huge victory that you can think, oh, this guy's going to go here, and then 2 turns from now, he's going to come out and he'll live there, and then I'll get those rewards. Like, you can really sequence stuff in a way that feels so satisfying. And so that's a total W as well for me.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's going to finish pretty much everything that we have to say about this one. We had quite a bit to say about this one. It's been fun exploring it for sure. And I imagine some of us more than others will be playing it more in the future, but I can imagine we're all going to get at least another couple plays in. So yeah, that's going to bring this one to a close. If you have anything you'd like to say about this, if any questions, or if you have experience with the game and you want to weigh in, then please comment about it. There is a YouTube version of this podcast. You can find that in the description of the podcast, or if you're watching this on YouTube, then hello, and go ahead and comment down below. We really like to see that kind of feedback. And yeah, that's going to bring this to a close. Thanks again for listening.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.